Domo domo, what is up everybody? Welcome back to the Anime Lounge for Jujutsu Kaisen, a comparison of the anime to the manga source material. We are here for anime episode 6. Now of course the anime has been going strong, giving us a lot of great action sequences, character development, but of course we are still very early in the series, because where we left off in episode 5 was actually just a couple pages shy of the end of chapter 10, and episode 6 takes us through the last couple pages of chapter 10 as well as chapter 11, 12, and a good portion of chapter 13 as well. And it's an amazing set of chapters that we've got here in episode 6, because I've even talked about this in a separate video of mine, my kind of top moments of Jujutsu Kaisen manga so far. This is really where we get a lot of the intrigue, right? A lot of kind of the story building, the character building, and we really kind of get an idea of what Jujutsu Kaisen is kind of all about. The rules kind of, of course Akutami Sensei is a big fan of Togashi Sensei of Hunter x Hunter, Yu Yu Hakusho fame. So we kind of get a little bit of an idea of how the curse techniques work and kind of the intricacies, as well as, concepts like binding vows and things like that. So it's not the most action-packed episode, but there is a lot of intrigue and a lot to talk about. And definitely I've found myself, I say this is a manga versus anime comparison to see where the anime kind of deviates from the manga. And I gotta say, it's every week I'm having less and less things to talk about as far as where it deviates, because they're staying quite true to the manga source material, but of course taking kind of creative liberties as far as like the action sequences and things like that, as one might expect. But Jujutsu Kaisen, definitely one of the more one of the anime that is kind of really staying true to the manga source material than perhaps some other things, which I'm not going to name off here. But so it's absolutely amazing to see as a longtime fan and translator. But hey, just one more thing too. Thank you very much for spreading that positive juju, for the likes and the comments every week. Hey, but without further ado, anime versus manga comparison, Jujutsu Kaisen episode 6. Let's do it. Alright, so we start out with kind of a little bit of a gruesome scene here with Itadori's dead body, and we see the big gaping hole in his chest here. So I like the little effect that they do here, where, it kind of zooms in, and then it kind of reveals as though it's kind of going into the heart, even though he doesn't have one, which is kind of a funny little comment which Sukuna says, but they're in his heart, so to speak. And they talk about this concept of the innate domain, right? It's a concept which Sukuna describes as what lies kind of within one's heart. And then later on, we kind of get into the concept of expanding, the domain expansion is the idea of taking one's innate domain and then kind of bringing it into reality, so to speak. But that I'm not gonna get too deep into that right here. But of course, I love this, the classic scene of Sukuna saying, "Hey, don't look up at me, Brad," and then Itadori saying, "Well, then why don't you come down here so I can look down on you instead?" So awesome. And of course, this is where we kind of get into the opening and kind of a talking point. And what I've talked about in previous episodes as well is this sort of picnic scene at the end. And now we have the second years added, as well as Yujichi and Shoko in the back there. So very cool, and I still see a little bit more room, so perhaps we'll get the likes of Kyoto School and stuff in there as well, which would be cool. Todo, Mai, Miwa. We'll see. Again, this is very much an interesting concept because Itadori's whole spiel is about, the grandfather saying, be surrounded by those that are dear to you, when you go. So this is very much supposed to be kind of a symbolic scene as well, right? But yeah, very cool, very cool, as we head back into the episode, and it is called After the Rain, which is interesting because After the Rain is actually the title for chapter 10. And if I'm not mistaken, episode 7 is going to be called Assault, which is chapter 14's title, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, we're definitely kind of going by threes here now. So the episode title is not directly related to the chapter title. Sometimes it skips ahead or it kind of falls behind, but interesting either way. And then, Itadori kind of chit-chatting with Sukuna as he takes this skull and throws it. And I love this kind of little cinematography that they have going on here as Itadori's running up this rib, this bone, right? And then he's coming in for the punch. It's nothing too flashy in terms of what the action that's going on, but a cool little scene here because Yuji does this. Almost seems like something like capoeira or martial arts related, at least, right? Not just like a regular flying kick or something like that. He changes his trajectory and kind of does this like reverse heel kick kind of thing. I don't know what it's called exactly, but maybe a capoeira expert out there can tell me. But it's interesting because as manga readers, we've been given information recently which seems to suggest that Itadori is perhaps trained in martial arts a little bit, specifically something called Taido. So perhaps this was our first glimpse at Itadori using Taido, and we actually didn't know it then. So very cool. This is why I love kind of watching the anime as a longtime manga reader, because we pick up on these little hints and cues that we didn't realize before. Yeah, and then we kind of course, Sukuna takes care of business pretty quickly here as he's sitting on Yuji, and this is where we get a little bit of the intrigue, right? Certainly Sukuna revealing that he has a keen interest in Fushiguro, that there is some sort of perhaps latent power which would benefit Sukuna. This is again a concept which I talked about in a different video, talking about Fushiguro's secret power. So check that out if you're interested. It kind of goes into talking about why Sukuna is interested in Fushiguro and how, perhaps it would benefit him. But then Sukuna is talking about this concept of the binding vow. Now, this is very much something which Kitami Sensei has brought forth as this concept, saying that in the world of Jujutsu, there is this idea of the binding vow where two people make a promise with each other, or you can actually make a binding vow with yourself as well. But we'll get into the specifics of that another time. Sukuna saying, okay, so first thing is when I say in chain, you have to lend me your body for 1 minute. And he goes on saying, I promise I won't kill or whatever, do anything bad in that time. It's not really spoiling anything to say that Sukuna would love nothing better than to come back to life, right? To have control of his own body again. So perhaps it does have something heavily to do with that. And all he needs is a minute at the right time to perhaps get revived, right? But then the second promise is to forget this whole exchange happened, which is cool because later on when Itadori is talking to Gojo, that's why Itadori's kind of like, I don't really remember. This is very cool because this scene of kind of Sukuna holding up the fingers too is very much the way that it was represented kind of in the manga. And even the chains in the manga, they had the chains kind of going on in this panel, but they didn't have it as elaborate where you see Sukuna kind of wrapped around in the chains. So this is definitely something that they decided to take a little bit of a creative take on in the anime. Very cool, very cool. But this idea of the binding vow is very, very important. We see it time and time again in the manga, that it is serious business, that no matter how strong you are, even if you're Sukuna and some other characters get revealed along the way too, that if you break a binding vow, now the specifics aren't very clear as far as what the punishment can be, but like even the likes of Sukuna doesn't mess with breaking a binding vow. But then the Yuji's like, fine, I gotcha, as he's kind of patting himself off. The punch to the face, and the classic, the face kind of crumpling in, just the same way that it was in the manga. So very, very cool. And then this is where kind of a very, very big moment happens where, when we first read this as readers, this was very early on in the series, and we didn't really think too much about it, but where we are in the manga, we have to kind of remind ourselves that this moment happened, and it is very, very significant. That Sukuna basically tells Yuji, fine, my promise still stands, but if you can defeat me, then I'll just revive you, no strings attached. But of course, Sukuna's smart enough, and Yuji... The problem here is that Yuji does say okay, so he agrees to it, which is precisely why as soon as Yuji agrees to it, kind of comically almost, right, the way that the head just kind of, the face just gets sliced off here. And of course this was a very iconic scene in the manga as well, so they pretty much went the same way, just kind of looking face on, and then excuse the pun, head on, excuse the pun, and the top half just kind of coming off almost comically, right? So we have to kind of remember that Yuji did agree to it. So right now there is a binding vow between Yuji and Sukuna. So we have to kind of remember that, and the reason why Sukuna told Yuji that he has to forget about it is the fact that just as we see later on in the episode, how Gojo asked Yuji, did Sukuna make any promises with you or something? And he doesn't remember it. So the fact that Yuji can't tell anyone about it is a big deal. Because if Gojo were to recognize that fact, then perhaps you'd be like, dude, we have to do something about this, right? But Gojo has his suspicions, but he can't really be sure. But then we kind of flash over to Jujutsu High again, and this kind of the coroner's room, for Shoko, and a little conversation here between Gojo and Ijichi, always with the comedy. Ijichi, you're in for a serious face slap later. I don't have a personality. And this is interesting because, Akutami Sensei has officially even said too, kind of in canon, that Gojo Sensei can do everything. He's got everything except a personality. So that's what Akutami Sensei has actually said. So the fact that he kind of has a lousy personality, which is true. I mean, Gojo is of course he's very compelling in the sense that he's so strong and charismatic and this and that, but he doesn't really have a personality that one would really appreciate, perhaps. But that's subjective, I guess. But it's cool because this is where, again, more of the intrigue of Gojo talking about what his dream is. For someone like Gojo and his status, what is his objective? And he's talking about how he really wants to kind of rewrite the way that the Jujutsu Kaisen world, not Jujutsu Kaisen world, the Jujutsu world is formed. He's getting sick and tired of these kind of old farts making, with their old-fashioned way of running things. But he could just as easily go up there and kill them all. But then, he keeps on talking about how he wants to foster the future generation, which is amazing. This scene is so well represented. It looks even cooler in the anime compared to the manga, because even in the anime you can see the different hair colors and stuff too. Like, I don't know, it's kind of a weird thing to be like, whoa, cool about, but it's cool. It's just the way, it's very aesthetically pleasing, the way that you see the different hair colors and stuff. It's kind of like Kuroko's basketball almost. But he also goes on to explain how the likes of second year Tokyo, second year Okkotsu which is a big name from volume 0, and I won't get too much into it, but he is classified as a special grade sorcerer, so he is indeed very tough. But also one of the mysterious characters, Hakari, who is a third year at Tokyo Jutsu High. Even in the point where we are in the manga, it's not really a spoiler at all. We know next to nothing of Hakari, besides the fact that, last episode Maki had mentioned that stupid third year suspended, so that's why we need your guys' help in the Goodwill event. So there is some sort of something happened with Hakari. He did something to get himself suspended, which is interesting considering that, Jujutsu High is not your normal school. Like, what do you have to do to get yourself suspended from a place like that? But the fact that he's being put in the same company as Okotsu Yuta and Yuji and stuff means that he's extremely strong. So, very intriguing character. But then we see a Shoko again saying, hey, you guys just going to stick around for the show, or what's going on? And then Yuji kind of comically sitting up, very same the way that it was like in the manga, and Yujichi freaking out. And I love the comment here how Gojo's like, shut up, Yujichi. And it's so funny, the way that Yuji is like, oh man, I'm full frontal, huh? And then the kind of disappointed face by Shoko. I remember that face too, so it's kind of cool the way that they do it, the way that they keep it in there for the anime as well. Again, staying really true to the manga source material. But I like this little bit where, Shoko's coming along like, here, wear this shirt at least. And then iconic, so iconic. You're going to hear me saying iconic over and over again, but Gojo saying, hey, welcome back, Yuji. Very much the same way, and Yuji kind of like, hey, I'm back. And then the high five. So very cool to see this come to life as we kind of move outside. And I love these kind of little we have these scenes in the manga as well, in panels and stuff of the hallways of Jutsu High and things like that too. But I think in manga form, it's always so easy to just kind of gloss over it. But when you see it in anime form, in color, and just kind of the perspective, it's so cool to see and so much more noticeable, right? What an amazing property this Jutsu High is. But as they're walking along and Gojo kind of telling Shoko, no, just leave him as dead on the records for right now. I got a little business I gotta attend to with him. But man, one of my favorites, and this guy, the part-time worker at the restaurant here, in the very first popularity poll, he was like ranked like number like 14 or 15 or something, which, it speaks to so much how much of an impact this guy made in such a small amount of time. But I love the way that they, in the anime, how they have his kind of face here kind of freaking out. And then even in the back, you see the way that there are like these little shadows there. But this is cool because in the manga, they just kind of have it as, just blank, just Gojo sitting at the table. But I like this little effect that they have here. The fact that the part-time worker, arubaito as they call him, recognizes the fact that there's something off. He, like, his primal feelings can recognize that there's something off about that table. It's so great. As we also get this little panel about him and his kind of sisters-in-law, and so he's a good guy, right? So I'm glad that he got out of there. But then Geto is talking about this idea of prison realm. So a very big point of intrigue that this is perhaps the only way to get Gojo out of the conversation, so to speak. I like the way that the part-time worker is kind of comically running out there. See ya, boss, I'm out of here, I quit. And then Jogo with the face, very much the same way in the manga, and we even get the little cool effect of the volcano erupting. Although in the manga the boss looks a little bit different, but it's very much the same way how he's kind of approaching the table, kind of fanning himself, and then just poof. And this is perhaps one of the moments in where I would say I noticed a big difference between the anime and the manga. In a good way, though. I mean, in the manga, this scene of the bodies kind of burning up and stuff was quite swift. In the manga, of course, it was a very disturbing scene in the manga, even. But like here, the way that they have, you know, this lady here and how it kind of pans around and how she has this freaked out face. Of course, you know, like the high school girl talking to her friend and how she, you know, is freaking out, but then she turns, oh God, it's intense. It's the music in the background too that they got going on. It's just like really creepy. And oh man, the kicker is when the lady is kind of like crawling out and she's trying to get away from this restaurant. Oh God. It's intense. Like I'm getting goosebumps even like talking about it right now. It's intense. So they did a really great job. The kind of emotion, the kind of like this visceral feeling from the viewer that perhaps wasn't as, I wouldn't say wasn't as effective in the manga. It's just that they didn't, Akutami says they didn't really pursue it as much in the manga as they did here in the anime. Which I think in the anime was extremely effective because it just shows how scary these curses are, especially special grade curses like the likes of Jogo. And it kind of makes you wonder what like Hanami is about or what Squidward is about and what Geto is all about and this and that, right? So very, very, very well done scene. I absolutely love it. As we have Jogo, you know, asking Geto like, how many fingers worth am I? And Geto is saying, well, it's to be generous, maybe 8 or 9. And then this face by Jogo, it's like, give it to me and I'll take care of it. So an absolutely amazing, very, very well done scene. I was very impressed by it and feeling very kind of like, oh my God, like very creeped out. But then we kind of flash over to Fushiguro making contact with Okazaki Tadashi, the guy that was in the juvenile detention facility, right? Her, the little patch that was on his shirt. You know, a short scene, but very, very emotional again. Especially after the Jogo scene just now, you know, it's kind of a roller coaster of emotions. But it's they don't dwell on it too much, you know. It's not like a saint died or something like that. Okazaki Tadashi probably wasn't really much of a stand-up guy, so but it's kind of a reality check that this is very much based in reality, even though this idea of jujutsu is kind of fantastical and stuff. It kind of, this scene brings us back down to earth, that there are consequences and there are people who have to grieve, right? So very well done, very well done. Again, similar to the way that it was presented in the manga. But then again, we get another kind of different angle of Jujutsu High here, and this kind of building on the right, for you eagle-eyed fans out there, looks very similar to what we've seen in Volume 0, where it's perhaps kind of like a kind of a round table kind of place where you know, the higher ups come to kind of discuss matters at hand. That's just a guess though. But then we have Nobara running and Panda running behind her. It's I just love them. They have this really nice looking kind of track and field here, which wasn't as evident in the manga. Like, you could tell that they were running at like some sort of field or something, but they've got like a nice facility here almost, it looks like. But then Nobara, of course, telling Fushiguro, where the hell were you? I'm gonna go out there and buy myself a cute tracksuit. Get over here, we're tagging out. As she gets tossed away. But then we flash over to Yuji and Gojo. And Gojo, the training begins for Yuji, right? And Yuji, of course, very, very happy here that he gets to be taught by the strongest, which Gojo doesn't really deny. This is where we get into really an explanation of what cursed energy and cursed techniques are kind of about, right? So I love the way, again, this is, as longtime manga readers, it's nice to have this kind of refresher, right? So as Gojo kind of boom hits the green tea away, but then crumples the orange juice in on itself. And it's a very simple way of explaining it. What Gojo says is that electricity is cursed energy, but you can't really use cursed energy, electricity just on its own, right? So you have to use appliances. You have to apply it to a cursed technique, which is appliances, and then you can get kind of different effects out of it, right? Whether it be a hair dryer, or a vacuum cleaner, or a refrigerator, or a TV, or whatever, right? So it's a very simple but very easy to understand way of explaining it. And he does explain, kind of further explain, that the green tea is just kind of boom, I hit that with cursed energy, but the orange juice, I used my cursed technique. And you're like, oh, what kind of cursed technique makes him do that? Which, based on what we know now, it could be, again, without getting into too much spoiler territory, it's probably a very small blue. So cool little hint there. But again, this comedic moment, and I'm so happy that they did this, and they actually took it kind of the extra mile here. As Gojo's explaining to Yuji, sorry bud, you don't really have a curse technique, as he's kind of like, oh, it's all over. And the way that he's talking to is so funny. It's kind of like this wavering, like, as he goes on to say, of course, maybe the eagle-eyed Shonen Jump fans out there will recognize that he says Reigan, which is spirit gun, I guess, in the way that it's translated in English from Yu Yu Hakusho, the one that Yusuke used. And then, of course, Zangetsu, as he's saying Bankai from Bleach, yeah. And then Rasengan from Naruto, right? And then he does say kind of one more. He says Dodonpa, which is from Dragon Ball. It's something that like Taopaipai uses very early in Dragon Ball series. But anyway, so very, very cool Shonen Jump references. So it's kind of breaking that fourth wall almost, right? So I absolutely love this scene. They took it the extra mile, because they had this idea of Yuji kind of like turning into this kind of like piece of paper almost on the ground and saying, oh, I wish I could have used fire and thunder, which is probably a reference to like Final Fantasy or like Dragon Quest and things. I think it's more Final Fantasy though, using like fire element as well as electricity element and things like that. But then he says power bomb, which is just a wrestling move. But again, so it's very, very cool. As Gojo Sensei is kind of explaining to Yuji, okay, so how do you harness curse energy? It's the idea of kind of perhaps tapping into certain amount of negative emotion, whether it be anger or fear and stuff, but not overdoing it, right? And this is a very interesting concept. Otherwise you just kind of like burn yourself out. But then, Yuji saying, yeah, you're right, Fushiguro always looks so pissed off. So I thought that was funny. But then we kind of flash back to the field here as Fushiguro saying, oh, someone's talking about me. As we see in the back here, Panda tossing Nobara, and Toge playing wide receiver here. This is again same way that it was represented in the manga too. So I love the little details that they're keeping in the anime. So cool. But then we have Gojo talking about hey, you're going to be training watching movies, and this is cool because there's a couple of references here. There's one on the right here of the Yu-Gi-Oh movie. I think it was called Bonds of Time, if I'm not mistaken. Then on the left three, the rightmost one is October Sky, most likely. There were a couple people on Twitter that helped me out about this, but I don't recognize the other ones. If you do, let me know in the comments though, because I'd be really happy to see. And then even on the table here, we see the Dark Knight, kind of a spoof on the Dark Knight, and on the bottom there. So very cool, very cool. But then we get introduced to another cursed doll of Yaga Sensei, Principal Yaga, right? As he's punching Yuji in the face here. So we get introduced to this kind of the training method, right? And nothing to go into too much about, but just the kind of idea of Gojo saying, okay, you're going to have to train to keep your cursed energy in check. Like I was talking about earlier, not to use too little and not to burn yourself out either, right? Then we switch back to the field again as they're kind of chit-chatting, and Fushigoro's trying to kind of figure some things out. He's the way that Sukuna had kind of talked to him suggested that Fushiguro has a lot more potential. Fushigoro's trying to figure out what that really means, as he's able to tap into the kind of the shadow realm, the Yu-Gi-Oh reference, right? But because what he was just talking about is this idea of what do I do with these weapons and stuff. It's so cumbersome to hold them, and I can't use my signs, my Shikigami signs, without having both hands open. As we kind of find out a little bit later on, it's not really a spoiler, he's able to use this kind of the shadows kind of as a utility ability. But I love this too, where Toge kind of recognizes, hey, check that out, snot. And Maki, it's so funny because I remember this in the manga, the little bloop of Maki just kind of like sitting there and like with this like funny look on her face. So they represented that in the anime too, but I kind of prefer the way that she looked in the manga in this particular panel anyways. So yeah, very cool. But then we see Kugisaki. She made her way over to Harajuku here, and she keeps on saying, where's Urahara? Urahara is just a nickname for what they call, it's an area of Harajuku that's kind of away from the central area, kind of the the back roads, kind of the more where the seasoned people might know where the good shops and stuff are. So it's not really meant to be anything more than that, but we see Nobara kind of dressed up, so that's cool too, because we always just see her in her uniform, right? So, but cool the way that they represent Harajuku and stuff here. But then we go back to Yuji watching his movie and having some Heaven's Cola, which sounds amazing. I could go for some Heaven's Cola too. And this little, in the manga, they had a little shot of the TV and talking about the cutting the red wire and the blue wire and stuff. So it was funny, but it wasn't as elaborate as this, like, half a minute scene that we have here of this guy talking to this girl saying like, oh, what do I do? And this and that. So it was cool the way that they did that in the anime. But of course, this is kind of where we have the intrigue, right? Of Gojo asking Yuji, hey, did Sukuna say anything to you while you were dead? Again, kind of getting back to that point that I was talking about earlier with the binding vow. So this is meant to be a very, very important scene, right? As Gojo has this face kind of like of concern for sure, right? We get this shot of Ijichi driving Gojo, and this is cool too, because in the manga we see this little shot of Ijichi and Gojo in the back seat here, as Gojo kind of saying like, hey, stop it right here, and Ijichi, of course, with the funny little, am I being tested or something? I love the Akutami Sensei just with those little comedic moments here and there, right? So well done. As we have Gojo kind of saying, all right. And then, we kind of pans up. In the manga, it's cool because we have this kind of tall frame showing both Gojo and kind of the shadow, the outline of Jogo in the cloud, and not in the cloud, in the moon, right? So, but in the anime, they just represent it as this kind of panning up, which of course, very cool, very cool. But the last panel that we get, not the last panel, but we get this big shot of Jogo coming, even in the way that this is the same way that it was in the manga. So very cool. They're really treating these iconic moments with a lot of respect, because even the way that Jogo just kind of comes in, you see this little crater and Gojo kind of backing up. It's the same panel in the manga, so I love it. And then we have Jogo. You're gonna hear me tongue twist a lot, getting my tongues twisted a lot because of the Jogo and the Gojo, and then Gojo with and you might be kind of deal, right? And that's where we end the episode. But then so that basically leaves us just a few pages shy of the end of chapter 13, which of course for kind of a lot of the buzz right now is that episode 7 is going to be a big moment. And without revealing too much, a very, very iconic scene will most likely be in episode 7. In a very heavily action-packed episode. But before we get into the little look at the little teaser, we have Gojo and his Go Gojo. And it's so funny because I noticed that that Gojo, so what he's playing is Go, like if you know Hikaru no Go, the pieces are technically supposed to be placed on the where the lines cross. So the fact that he's putting it like in the squares, I think he's actually like playing Reversey, Othello. You know that game where you flip the black and white. So I think it's supposed to be kind of like this inside joke or this kind of funny thing that showing that Gojo actually has like no idea what he's doing here. And I don't know, this reference kind of went over my head of Gojo kind of talking to Yuji here. I don't know if it's supposed to mean something or some sort of inside joke. Maybe if you know what the deal is, you can tell me in the comments. But as we kind of get our little preview look at episode 7, which is called Assault, you know, we get this creepy look from Geto here, creepy smile, and then we get even a look at Ghost Rider almost. Looks like Gojo's head is on fire here. But of course, the final panel here of Gojo reaching for his kind of blindfold. So it's going to be a big one. A lot of people have been, you know, talking about this for, you know, years now. Like, this is a big moment in Jujutsu Kaisen. It's like, it's a big moment for the hype factor. It's not really a big moment in terms of like lore and things like that, I would say, or kind of like story intrigue. It's just kind of, it's a very hype moment. Episode 6 was just packed full of a lot of story intrigue, character development, kind of the concepts and things like that. So it was a very necessary episode, not the most action-packed episode, but a very good one to kind of develop the world a lot more and just kind of give it a little bit more depth, right? And next week we'll be getting into the action with episode 7. But hey, thank you so much. Really, I appreciate it. Been seeing a lot of new faces and stuff too. So thank you for spreading that positive juju with a like, comment, sharing it with people that you know. Got you know, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that 1,000 subscribers is right around the corner. So it'd be very cool, perhaps, if we can reach that soon. And hey, cheers to you. You know how we do. Mata yoroshiku. All right, here we go.